Well, here we are this morning. I'm not sure how many weeks now into this pandemic. I don't know about you, but the mornings have started to blend together, especially midweek. I wasn't always quite sure whether it was Tuesday or Wednesday. Hopefully, though, the tide is beginning to turn and the worst is over. But we're still in this strange world of lockdown. Sadly, over the last few weeks, we have seen the death toll continue to rise as day by day somebody's mother or brother or grandparent sadly passes away in hospital or care home. Each time we turn on the news, the terrible effects of this virus have been plain to see. Some countries seem to have been handling it very well. Others, frighteningly, seem to have no idea what they're doing. And then we look at our own leadership here in the UK. Now, I don't know what you think about Prime Minister Boris Johnson. You might think he's the best thing since Churchill, or you might have quite a different opinion. You may have voted for this Tory government, or you may never have voted Tory in your entire life. Each one of us will have our own attitude to those who are currently in authority over us. And our Bible passage this morning has really quite a lot to say about how we as Christians act towards those in authority. This morning we're continuing to look at the letter 1 Peter. Our passage is 1 Peter 2 verses 11 to 17. And in it, Peter has a lot to say about how Christians need to live in relation to those who are in government and authority. It's not necessarily an easy message for many of us to hear. Peter talks about submitting to and honouring those in authority. But when we're in the middle of a pandemic and we see the death toll rise and the stress that's being put on our healthcare workers, what does it mean to submit and to honour those who are in authority? Is Peter telling us that we should just go along with everything the government does and not make a fuss? I think quite a lot of politicians would be quite happy if Christians just kept quiet and minded their own business. Should us Christians just keep the religious stuff at home and stay out of politics altogether? Well, no. Christians are most definitely to be a part of what's going on in our world. But what Peter makes clear when it comes to submitting to authority is that as Christ's followers, we live firstly under the authority of God. Peter writes in verse 11, "Dear friends, I urge you as foreigners and exiles. Our allegiance, our citizenship, is firstly in heaven." And then he goes on to say in verse 12, "As foreigners, we are to live such good lives among the pagans, that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits." As those who are citizens of God's kingdom, we're to respect and honour government and authority, not because they're necessarily right, but because our lives are to be a witness to our faith. We demonstrate by our attitude and our behaviour that we are God's people. If we fail to follow the lockdown rules just because we don't like them, if we get angry at those in authority because we're fed up or because we're having a difficult time, if we become rude and disrespectful, that reflects on how all Christians are perceived, and it reflects on how Christ is seen by those around us. That's why we are to submit and honour those in authority. But the balance to this is that human authority does not have the ultimate claim on our lives. Many Christians have been imprisoned, tortured and executed for standing up against injustice and oppression in our world. Whatever government we live under, we are to speak the truth of God's word and to stand up for what is right without fear of the consequences. Due to his Christian faith, William Wilberforce forfeited all political success in his campaign against the evils of slavery. Martin Luther King Jr. was murdered for being the spokesperson of the civil rights movement in America. And Catholic priest Oscar Romero was assassinated for speaking up about poverty and social injustice in El Salvador. But what does all this mean for us as we struggle through another week of this strange lockdown world? Well, it means doing what Peter suggests in his letter, living for the glory of God, speaking words that are respectful and helpful. In this crisis, Twitter and Facebook and newspaper letter pages are full of angry people shouting into the wind. We, as Christ's followers, have a real opportunity to demonstrate a different way of living. We can speak peace to the anger, hope to the darkness. We can speak of the joy that we have and the future that we look forward to. And at the same time, we can speak out against injustice that causes the poorest in our society to be most affected by this virus. We could write, we can campaign, and we should, of course, pray. Pray for those in leadership. Pray for the people who have authority to make decisions that affect our whole country. In all that we do and say, we need to think about the words of 2 Peter verse 17. And I'm going to quote here from the Message version of the Bible. Treat everyone you meet with dignity. Love your spiritual family. Revere God. Respect the government. We are to live differently to those around us, calmly, respectfully, treating all people with dignity. We are God's people who in faith can look beyond the stress and concerns of today to a future where there will be no more death or suffering. As lockdown hopefully begins to ease, may our lives continue to bear witness to the truth of the good news of Jesus Christ and the hope and salvation for our world. Amen.